In 1998, the Chicago Bulls and Indiana Pacers would meet in the Eastern Conference Final. Surprisingly, the first and only meeting between these two teams during their legendary 90s run. The series would soon become an instant classic, with clutch performances, close games, physicality, and the two greatest words in sports, Game 7. Welcome to Legendary Series Michael vs. Reggie. Game 1 from the United Center in Chicago, the Bulls would line up with Ron Harper, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Tony Kukoc, and Luke Longley. The Pacers would counter with Mark Jackson, Reggie Miller, Chris Mullin, Dale Davis, and Rick Smits. The Pacers would jump out early to a 10-3 lead with 8 points coming by Dale Davis. But the Bulls would storm back moments later, tying the game at 14 with an energy boost led by Dennis Rodman. Michael would not shoot well in the early going just 1 for 7 from the field in the first quarter, and the Bulls as a team would shoot just 18% in the first. But the Pacers, led by Reggie Miller, Dale Davis, and Rick Smits, would take a 6-point lead into the second quarter. The Bulls stars would continue to struggle in the second quarter, going a combined 3 of 24 in the first half. It was Dennis Rodman leading the way for the Bulls with 7. Rebounding and role players would be keeping the Bulls competitive in the first half, forcing 11 early Indiana turnovers, leading to a 6-0 run at the end of the first half to cut the Pacers' lead to 3. Pacers lead 40-37 at the break. The Bulls would start the second half the same way they ended the first, with a quick 10-0 run. The Bulls' defense would suffocate the Pacers throughout the second half, led by Scottie Pippen, dominating Mark Jackson and virtually anyone else near him. But it was Michael taking over offensively, with a 10-point explosion in the third, using the low post and the mid-range jumper to get his game back on track. But in clutch time, it was Michael's moment, and he would score 15 points in the fourth, leading the Bulls on to an 85-79 win, taking a 1-0 lead in the series. Jordan would lead all scorers with 31 points, and the next closest scorer was Reggie with 16. Turnovers would doom the Pacers, who finished with 25 total turnovers. They would continue to struggle throughout the series with the Bulls' physical defense. Prior to tip-off of Game 2, Michael would receive his 5th and final MVP award. Starting lineups would stay the same, and the Pacers would start Game 2 hot, shooting 57% in the first quarter, getting buckets in transition. But turnovers would continue to doom the Pacers in the first quarter, and the Bulls' defense would keep Reggie off the scoreboard throughout the first half, finishing with just 3 points. The Pacers would finally be able to clean up their turnovers in the second quarter and flip the script on the Bulls on the boards, owning the glass to start Game 2. But Michael would lead the way for the Bulls with 10 points in the second quarter to finish the half with 17. Pippen would struggle offensively, going just 3 for 11 in the first half, but continuing to be a force defensively with 2 blocks and 2 steals in the first half. The Pacers would lead 52-47 at the break, led by Chris Mullin with 11. And the Pacers bench would outscore the Bulls 19-2 in the first half, putting more pressure on the Bulls stars, and there would be no free throw discrepancy for Pacers coach Larry Bird to complain about, with the Pacers having 15 free throws to the Bulls' 13. The third quarter would see both teams go back and forth. The game was tied at 64, and Michael would go into the takeover mode again with 12 of the Bulls' next 14 points to take a 78-74 lead into the fourth. And in the fourth, Reggie would finally wake up, hitting crucial buckets, but then turnovers would doom the Pacers yet again, and Michael would close out down the stretch, ending the game with 41. Bulls take a 2-0 lead heading to Indiana. The story of the first 2 games was the Bulls' defense putting the Pacers in uncomfortable positions, and the Pacers continually turning the ball over. Indiana is desperate for a win, heading back to Market Square. Game 3 from Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana. Dennis Rodman replacing Tony Kukoc in the starting lineup for the Bulls, with Phil Jackson looking for more help containing the Indiana Bigs early in Game 3, something they failed to do back in Chicago. The Pacers would start hot yet again, hitting their first 7 shots, with Reggie going 3 for 3 early in this pivotal Game 3. But then, Indiana would go ice cold from the field, missing their next 11 shots. However, it was the Pacers' ability to hold on to the ball and not turn it over that was their biggest positive early in Game 3. For the Bulls, Michael would start slow again, but Pippen would pick up the slack, going 3 for 3, but leaving points at the foul line. Pacers lead 26-24 at the end of the first. And in the second, the Bulls would take over, with Michael and Kukoc leading the way, with Steve Kerr also hitting a big 3. The Bulls would take the lead and extend it to 8, but the Pacers, knowing their season was on the line, would claw back to cut the lead in half, heading into the break. And coming out of half, the Pacers would immediately tie the game, but the Bulls would strike back right away, going on a run, but during the run, Reggie would land on Michael's foot, spraining Reggie's ankle severely and leaving him hobbled. As he heads to the locker room, the Bulls would take an 8-point lead and threaten to run away with it. Suddenly, the Pacers' season was looking like it was over. But with their star injured and heading to the locker room, the Pacers would fight back. With their season on the line, led by backup point guard Travis Best, the Pacers would put together a 12-4 run to tie the game at 77, heading to the fourth. But just before the fourth, Reggie would hobble out of the tunnel and refuse to see his team go down 3-0, putting together a 13-point explosion in the fourth, hitting big-time clutch shots on one ankle, turning in one of the grittiest performances you'll ever see by one of the clutchest shooters in NBA history. The Pacers would hold a 101-93 lead with 1:26 left. But the Bulls' championship DNA would refuse to let them surrender. Led by Michael, the Bulls would cut the lead to 1 in the final minute before the Pacers would hold on behind clutch free throw shooting. The Bulls lead 2-1 in the series. The Pacers finally get their win, and now they know they can beat this Bulls team and reach their organization's first finals. With the Pacers looking to tie the series, all eyes were on Reggie, who would still be feeling the effects of his ankle injury that happened less than 48 hours ago. Kukoc would be back in the starting lineup for the Bulls, replacing Rodman. Everything else would stay the same. And in the first quarter of Game 4, it was Scotty and Kukoc leading the way for the Bulls, with Michael struggling again early on. And with Reggie's injury, Indiana would need someone to step up in Game 4. And luckily for them, the Bigs were up to the task, with the Davis brothers and Rick Smits accounting for 18 of the Pacers' 24 first quarter points. Chicago would lead 27-24 at the end of the first. And in the second, Michael would take over yet again, with 13 points in the quarter, helping the Bulls eventually amass a 12-point lead. But it would be Reggie Miller and the Pacers' Bigs continuing to hit big shots to keep them in it, with the Bulls leading 54-48 at the break. The Bulls shot 59% in the first half, and they would continue that in the third quarter, taking a 10-point lead, with Rick Smits almost single-handedly keeping the Pacers alive, scoring 13 of the team's 21 points in the quarter. However, it wasn't enough, as the Bulls would lead by 8 going into the fourth. Early on in the fourth, the Bulls would maintain their lead, and the Pacers would feel the heat, but with their backs against the wall, the Pacers would strike back again, putting together an 11-2 run to cut the lead to just 1, with just under 4 minutes left. Both teams would trade the lead back and forth down the stretch, but a big Pacers turnover in the final 10 seconds seemed to doom them, their only turnover of the quarter. However, Pippen would miss both free throws, keeping the Bulls' lead at just 1 with 2.9 seconds left. With the Pacers season on the line, Reggie would have his moment.
Harper's on Miller. McKee gets it in the middle for the win. It's 4/10 of a second.
With a legendary push-off, Reggie would give the Pacers a 2-point lead and celebrate like a kid on Christmas. But there was still 0.7 seconds left. And of course, it was now Michael's turn.
Kukoc to Michael at the buzzer. It spins out.
With that miss, the Bulls and the Pacers will be tied at 2, with the series shifting back to Chicago for an all-important Game 5. Game 5, back at the United Center in Chicago, and the Bulls would come out early, looking to make a statement. With Michael cooking future Bulls coach Fred Hoiberg early in Game 5, and the Bulls' big three would score all but 4 of the team's 29 first-quarter points, Michael obviously leading the way with 11, and their defense would be suffocating early on. In the second, nothing would change for the Bulls, who would take their lead and extend it, and the Pacers would miss 18 straight shots. The Bulls would lead 57-32 at half. On this night, the Pacers would have nothing for the Bulls, who would win 106-87, with the Bulls' big three scoring 68 points in the rout, and the Bulls would push the Pacers to the brink of elimination, heading back to Market Square. Game 6, back at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana, and to start Game 6, Michael would come out looking for the kill, with 12 points in the first, and while Reggie would struggle for the Pacers bigs would step up, with Rick Schmitz and Dale Davis leading the way. Both teams would play a clean first quarter with only one turnover on each side, and the game would be tied at 24 at the end of the first. And in the second, the Pacers bigs would continue to shine, now getting help from Mark Jackson. The Pacers would shoot 64% in the second. Meanwhile, the Bulls would only shoot 41%, with Pippen being the only Bulls player to make more than one field goal in the quarter. But free throws would keep the Bulls in it, with the Pacers leading 49-46 at the break. And to start the third, Michael would get hot, going 5 for 7 with 10 points, showing he wanted to end the series tonight. And Reggie would continue to struggle, but the Pacers bigs would keep them afloat with their season hanging in the balance. Indiana would get to the free throw line with regularity in the third to help take a 70-66 lead into the fourth. And in the fourth, both teams would get to the line with regularity, with the Bulls winning the free throw battle by making their free throws count. Offensive rebounding would also help the Bulls close the gap, but in the final minute, it would be Pacers backup point guard Travis Best playing hero for Indiana, with a clutch floater and 2 massive free throws to force Game 7 back in Chicago. Pacers win 92-89, series tied at 3.
We're going to win Game 7. That's promise. We will win Game 7.
Heading into Game 7, it would be Michael and Scotty's third Game 7 together. They would be 1-1 so far, and it has been 6 years since they were in this spot together. Meanwhile, the Pacers were a very experienced team in this position, with 22 combined Game 7s on their roster. The game plan for the Bulls was simple. Their defense had to create turnovers and limit Indiana's bigs, something they struggled to do throughout the series. Offensively, they needed to crash the glass. They had great success in this series when they created extra possessions. And second, they needed their stars to score. They don't have great depth, so they need everything they can get from Michael, Scotty, and Kukoc. For Indiana, they needed their bigs to dominate. With Reggie still not 100% from his ankle injury, it was on them to own the paint. But even with Reggie not 100%, they needed everything he had. He was their leader, and it was the biggest moment of their season. He had to step up. But most importantly, they would need the bench. Led by Travis Best, Jalen Rose, and Antonio Davis, they would have to play a key role if the Pacers were to end the Bulls' legendary run. Starting lineups would stay the same as they have for most of the series, and early in Game 7, the Bulls would go ice cold, and Indiana would take full advantage, going 8 for 8 to start the game. Led by Rick Schmitz and Dale Davis, Indiana would run out to a 20-7 lead. But the Bulls were unfazed, taking advantage of some bad Pacers turnovers and getting to the free throw line, forcing the Indiana Bigs into early foul trouble. Chicago would cut the lead to 7. The Pacers would lead 27-19 at the end of the first, with the Bulls' big three going a combined 4 of 16 from the field, with Pippen and Kukoc getting to the free throw line to keep the Bulls afloat early. With Michael and Reggie on the bench to start quarter 2, both teams would go ice cold. Then, Michael would come off the bench and spark a Bulls run that would see Chicago tie the game and eventually take the lead. With Steve Kerr hitting some big threes along the way, Chicago would eventually extend their lead to 7. But with his team in a free fall, Reggie would step up, hitting 2 big threes to cut the lead to 1 before Scott Burrell would beat the buzzer with a layup, giving the Bulls a 48-45 lead at the break. Both teams would start the third trading buckets, with Michael and Reggie hitting big shots and with getting help from Tony Kukoc and Chris Mullin, who were stepping up to give their teams a boost in this winner-take-all Game 7. Kukoc would stay hot throughout the third, scoring almost at will, and the Bulls would stretch their lead back to 7. And the Pacers would see Dale Davis go ice cold from the free throw line, just 2 for 6 in the quarter, leaving points at the foul line. But the Pacers would find a way to cut the lead to 4, entering the fourth. Bulls lead 69-65, entering the fourth. Indiana would start the fourth hot, with Jalen Rose and Rick Schmitz getting them going and getting them the lead. But Michael would dunk on Rick Schmitz moments later to take the lead back for the Bulls. And Rick Schmitz would have his answer on the other end, giving the Pacers the lead right back. Both teams would trade big buckets and the lead back and forth, with the game tied at 79 with 5 minutes left. But in the final 5, the Bulls stars would take over. With Michael and Scotty leading the way, the Bulls would take the lead, and it would be Rick Schmitz desperately trying to keep the Pacers alive, with Reggie being a no-show in the fourth. But it wasn't enough, as the Bulls would hang on 88-83 to bring this all-time classic to a close. Bulls take the series and advance to their 3rd straight NBA Finals. Chicago would go on to win the NBA title in 6 against the Utah Jazz, bringing their legendary run to a close, as the team would split up and Michael would retire. As for the Pacers, they would make the NBA Finals 2 years later, but unfortunately for them, Shaq and Kobe were waiting for them. And well, we all know how that went. And with that, thanks for watching, and until next time, we out.